There are a lot of anesthetic initiatives in sustainable care, and fortunately for us, Eric Deutsch came to me and said he wanted to be a point person on transitioning from desflurane to sevoflurane, and he'll go into more details about the why and the how we did it. But having a leader that's specialty specific, that understands the issue, is so crucial in success of projects like this. And I can't thank Eric enough for all the hard work he's done for the St. Luke's Sustainability Program on this issue and others. So without further ado, I'll just introduce Dr. Eric Deutsch.
Thanks. So full disclosure, I remember the conversation with Ethan a little differently. He educated me actually about desflurane and its environmental impacts. So just real quickly, are there any anesthesia providers in the audience other than Clint? You are? Retired, okay. So actually I'm going to speak very briefly about the transition away from desflurane and kind of more have you kind of peek into the black box of anesthesia, because most people don't really kind of know what goes on with anesthesia. And when you're talking to your anesthesia team about desflurane and waste gases, nitrous, it kind of helps to have a little background and kind of understand what they're talking about. So I gotta figure out how this works. Okay, so we all know so I missed the beginning of this here, but I'm gonna assume we've all talked about the crisis of global health dependent on the environment. I won't dwell over that. Did we talk about global warming potential in any of the other meetings? No, okay, so just kind of a basis of reference, 1 molecule of CO2, which is kind of the reference, is 1 standard unit of how much global warming potential it has. And that 1 molecule of CO2 lasts about 100 years until it's dissolved in the ocean. Chlorofluorocarbons, back in the 80s and 90s with the hairspray, they had over 10,000. 1 molecule of that was over 10,000 times more potent than a molecule of CO2 and lasts about 100 years. Nitrous, as Clint will talk about, it's about 300 times more potent and it lasts 114 years. It hangs out a long time. Isoflurane, an older gas, 350 times more potent. It lasts for about 3 years. You get in the picture here that anesthesia gases are pretty bad. They stick around for a long time and have a lot of global warming potential. Sevoflurane, which is our greenest one, is only 130 times more potent than CO2. And then what I'm going to mostly talk about is desflurane. This is the really bad one, and it's probably the easiest to get rid of from your anesthesia departments, and that's 2,500 times more potent. Nitrous, we are going to let Clint talk about, but nitrous is basically not regulated at all. It sticks around in the atmosphere for over 300 years. It's very bad, ozone depleting, and it leaks like a sieve in most of our hospital systems. So just to kind of let you in again on how the sausage is made, this is an anesthesia machine. In that anesthesia machine, basically it takes piped gases, air, nitrous, and oxygen, and it goes through several manifolds and eventually goes to a vaporizer, and that's where our anesthetic gases are. And those gases kind of are a carrier for that anesthetic vapor to the patient. And there's several devices in there to help prevent from getting a hypoxic mixture. And so the analogy I use for how we dose an anesthetic gas is you can kind of think of an analogy of like a river where our fresh gas flows, the oxygen, the air, the nitrous, that's the river. And kind of how fast that river flows will depend on how we deliver that anesthetic gas, and that anesthetic gas in this analogy is the pollution. So if we have a lot of big flowing river, we're going to deliver a lot of anesthetic gas as opposed to a trickling river. Once those gases leave the anesthesia machine, they go to the patient, obviously, and it's kind of a circle system. It's not a complete circle system, but a lot of it gets reused over and over again, depending on how fast the river is, how fast the fresh gas flow is. If it's a low gas flow, it'll keep circling over and over again and kind of get reused because anesthesia gases aren't metabolized, or very, very little metabolized. Any additional gases, waste gases, will go in this anesthesia gas scavenging system right here, which basically is a pipe to the atmosphere. And how we kind of talk about doses of anesthesia gas, we talk about MAC, which is basically the effective dose 50 of a anesthetic gas. And when we say we are giving a MAC of gas, we are saying we are giving enough gas that is going to prevent movement in 50% of the patients, the ED50. And that an ED95 to prevent movement in 95% of the patients would be 1.3 MAC. And so if we were to say we were going to give 1 MAC of gas of sevoflurane, that would be essentially 8 miles of CO2 emissions in an automobile. Isoflurane would be 18. Nitrous would be 120 miles. And desflurane, this is a little bit of an overestimate, would be around 200 miles. But you can see it's quite a big difference on the amount of CO2 equivalents. And so our current practice is that if you go into an anesthesia suite right now, and they're going to give a MAC of anesthesia gas, what that looks like is 2% sevoflurane, and that's running at 2 liters a minute. All right, and that's about 8 miles in your car, and that's the cost. ISO, which you don't see much anymore, it's a more concentrated gas, more potent, and that's about 18 miles. And you notice that you can run lower flows with the ISO, and we'll get into that in a little minute. Desflurane, which is not very potent, you need 6% of that, and that's 200 miles in your car for 1 MAC. And that's $12. And then nitrous, which is dirt cheap, but also spends a lot of CO2. So what they looked, an interesting study they did back in 2017 is they looked at 3 different institutions. They're all fairly similar, one in Vancouver, one in Minneapolis, and one in Oxford. They're both big academic centers. They're kind of all had the same beds and had the same kind of volume of cases. And they looked, and they kind of had different anesthetic techniques, and they looked to see kind of what their admissions was. And so here we have Vancouver, we have Minnesota, and we have Oxford. And you see Vancouver used a lot of desflurane, so did Minnesota, but nothing from Oxford. And then when you come over here, how many CO2 equivalents that was, the 500 or some odd liters they used in Vancouver, close to 2 million, close to 2 million in Minnesota, and 0 at Oxford. And you can see how low the total emissions were in Oxford based on their basically no desflurane use. Huge. However, anesthesia gas is not the sole source of CO2 emissions. We talked briefly about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. You can see that Oxford still had quite a bit of total CO2 emissions, but it wasn't from the anesthesia gas. You can see it was basically 0, or not 0, but very low because of the lack of desflurane as opposed to the other 2 institutions. But they had a lot of scope 2 emissions, and that is because their ORs were incredibly outdated and just energy sinks. So basically, I feel, and a lot of people coming out of training feel, that we have a responsibility to eliminate DES and reduce our nitrous use. And so what the ASA, our governing society, recommends we do is we use low gas flows, because if we use high gas flows, that's more waste out of the circle and out the smoke, out the chimney. Avoid nitrous and DES. Talk about TIVAs, just using TIVA as a total intravenous anesthetic, which means we don't use any gas at all. And then there's these new exciting things that are coming out where we capture these waste gases, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So this is our current practice. So the proposed practice, what I would propose to your anesthesia departments, if I was speaking to them, would be to use sevoflurane 2% at 1 liter a minute. And that's our greenest gas. It's inexpensive. We could do propofol. You could do a total intravenous anesthetic, which surprisingly has a less of a CO2 footprint, but is more expensive. You can mix it up with different anesthetic agents. This is propanremi. And then probably what we have found works best is using half a MAC of SIVO and then adding some propofol to that. And what you kind of get is you get a pretty green anesthetic, and it splits the cost. Oh, and then there's Xeon. You might hear more about Xeon in the near future. That's kind of the wonder gas that's hopefully going to come out. That has it's a noble gas. It has no CO2 footprint, but it's incredibly expensive. You may hear your anesthesia colleagues say, "Well, we can't run SIVO at 1 liter per minute because that'll lead to compound A, and that's going to cause renal failure in our patients." And anybody who remembers renal dose dopamine, the belief that having a little dopamine in the background is renal protective, this is anesthesia's version of renal dose dopamine. This won't die. The belief that you need to have 2 liters of fresh gas flows for your SIVO it's been debunked over and over again. So this is what a total intravenous anesthetic would look like. And then just real briefly, the impact of gas versus TIVA. Surprisingly, TIVAs are less, gases are 4 times, have a four time greater footprint, bigger footprint than TIVA, which I still find kind of surprising. But propofol has been found in a lot of water and marine life. We're going to just skip that. We're just going to skip that. So this is kind of the next elephant that I want to try to eat. There's this emerging technology that will actually capture these anesthesia gases instead of having them go out in the chimney into the environment. That'll actually capture the gas in either some sort of material matrix that'll just stay in there or be reused over and over again. We are having some problems in the US with the reused over and over again. Since again, most anesthetic gas is not metabolized, it's just used in the circuit, and in theory you could just keep capturing that and use that for a new patient. The EPA has a little something to say about that, so still trying to work on that, but these are emerging technologies. So barriers. What you're going to hear your anesthesia team say is that the anesthetic gases are just incredibly easy. There are these techs that come in and fill up these vaporizers, and it's just super easy, and all you do is turn a dial, and at the end of the day they get filled again, and it's like magic. There's no pumps to set up, no drips to spike, nothing like that. It's just super easy. And that switching away from an anesthetic gas to a more intravenous anesthetic technique is just time consuming, and that there's likely not enough pumps. You're going to need more pumps. You're going to need some additional monitoring. Sorry. And then they're going to argue with you that switching from desflurane is going to increase wake-up times and increase your PACU times and increase hospital costs. That's not the case. If you turned off the anesthetic gas, a MAC of SIVO and a MAC of DES at the same time, yes, the DES patient would wake up a little quicker. Probably not clinically significant. But that's not how we practice anesthesia. We predict when those gases are going to wear off, so we just shut the sevoflurane off a little earlier. But they're gonna argue that losing DES is going to cost you money from increased people in the PACU. So what we did, we have about St. Luke's in this Treasure Valley area have about 50 ORs, 3 main sites, and there was a DES vaporizer in each room, and we had professional speakers come and talk about exactly what I talked about more eloquently, and we started removing DES vaporizers. We removed half of them, and we put them in an anesthesia storage area. So if they wanted that desflurane vaporizer just wasn't right there, they had to walk to the supply area to physically get this heavy vaporizer and come and bring it to their machine. And we found that people were using less and less of it. And so then eventually we just said, hey, how about 1 vaporizer per site? And that's where we are right now. And truth be told, we are waiting for a handful of clinicians to retire so we can get rid of those last remaining DES vaporizers. And we will probably give them as retirement gifts. So again, my goal was to kind of educate you on how anesthesia is delivered and kind of when they're talking to you, have a little bit of a knowledge base on kind of what they're talking about and how you can argue. What questions does anyone have?
So it sounds like you are advocating kind of replacing nitrous oxide with propofol, because it used to be like, an additive to the SIVO. And so now, is that kind of what?
Replacing the nitrous?
Yeah, with propofol.
Actually, Clint's going to talk about that. We switched from piped nitrous to E-cylinders to deliver our nitrous, and then we're using more propofol to further decrease the anesthetic gas footprint, which is the major contributor to CO2 type emissions, greenhouse emissions.
Okay, very interesting. And then another just quick comment, because I practiced anesthesiology for 20 years, beginning in the mid-90s. And number one, I was never aware that our waste gases just go out into the air. I thought they were like, go and get, into that new system that you're talking about. I never knew it for decades.
We tried charcoal filters for a little bit, and everybody thought those were, hey, they're going into the charcoal, but they don't. They seep out over the next several days. So,
but that's just fascinating that you can practice for decades and not even know what. It
eventually goes in the scavenging system and out the roof.
Yeah, out of sight, out of mind.
Do you have any pointers for us trying to make change? Group of physicians, probably a lot of strong opinions. Tips for culture change when it comes to things like this?
So no physician likes to be told that they can't use a particular tool or instrument so it's finding, as Dr. Sims said, that champion, that physician champion. And it may take a little while for that person to come around, me included. The bug gets in their ear, they start doing some reading, they realize, yes, this is indeed the case, and then you really need to lean on that champion. So the change has to come from within. It has to come from within that department. If it comes from outside, it's just going to be walls up.
Brecklebeg, Washington. I'm a retired public health doc, not an anesthesiologist, but in Washington we tried legislative study, merely a study to determine the environmental effects of anesthesia gases as a waypoint to eliminating them. The bill failed miserably, and we're now looking to what you have done, which is to find a champion in each of the hospitals for voluntary change. So I would highly recommend that rather than legislating a requirement. Thanks.
Yeah, coming from the outside, it's just human nature, right? Nobody likes being told what they do, especially physicians. All right, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Just as a coda to Eric's talk, I want to share some of the data we've collected from that. In 2 years, 2022 and 2023, the changes that Anesthesia Associates of Boise made in switching from DES to SIVO saved over $250,000 to the St. Luke system and reduced emissions by close to 1,000 metric tons, which is equivalent to driving 2.75 million miles or 110 laps around the Earth. So one simple change that didn't impact patient care that made a massive difference in our carbon emissions.